One of the issues that I have with Senator Cornyn is he's not a leader in discovering, investigating, identifying, and proposing solutions to help fix our country. Part of the senator's job, outside of advise and consent and standing up for the United States Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and our state, is to analyze what's going on in our country, what needs to be legislated, how do we identify issues that are hurting our people, stop the activities that is hurting them, and help them achieve. The Constitution says provide for the common defense and promote the general welfare. Now, federal lawlessness, currency debt collapse, having our culture war and our failed economy is very important, but it's not my number one issue. Those issues are being talked about, but the reason this is my number one issue is because we haven't even admitted to our nation that we have a problem yet. We gain absolutely nothing when we hide bad news, and we have huge inner city decay brought on by four things: educational failure, no access to jobs, no access to the means, ownership of production, and the last is that you actually get penalized when you try to get yourself out of poverty. Boston right now has 43% dropout rate, even though they spend $18,000 a year per kid. New York City spends $15,000 a year per kid at 54% dropout rate. Detroit, 73% of everybody in Detroit drops out of high school, even though they spend $13,500. Indianapolis spends $14,000. Baltimore spends $10,000. Both those cities have 70% dropout rates. Dallas has a 56% dropout rate. San Antonio drops out 46% of our kids. Houston's got 46%. El Paso's a 40% dropout rate. Fort Worth is 45%. Arlington's 38%. Austin, our state capital, is the best here with 36% dropout rate. President Obama says we're doing fine. We're doing fine as a country. We're doing fine in the private sectors. We're doing fine in the cities. No, sir, we are not. We have the highest incarceration rate in the world, almost twice that of several countries in South America. We have the highest violent crime rate in the world. We have the highest murder rate in the world. Our kids in our cities are dying at a very high rate. Some horrific numbers, and I know these cities are hurting over it, so forgive me for bringing it up, but Detroit had 386 people murdered last year. New Orleans had 193. Baltimore had 217. Memphis had 157. Oakland had 131. New York, Chicago, San Antonio, Los Angeles. It goes all over our country. When you drop out of education, you are completely barred from the economy. This is a point I have to really stress. When you drop out of high school, you are barred from the economy because we have a four-tiered economy approach. You have agriculture, industry, technology, and information. We don't have agriculture in the city, obviously. We've destroyed our industry inappropriately, pushing those emissions overseas. And now, so the only thing a city really has is information, technology, and banking. So when you drop out of high school, you are saying, I am not going to have access to the top two tiers of the economic structure of our country. The other bottom two tiers have already been removed for me. So when you drop out of high school, you have no access to wealth, except for crime, criminality, drugs. The problem is when you're in these inner cities and you're barred from these economic successes, you can see wealth. It's predominantly wealth in a different skin color. And I understand where the narrative comes that it is racism and sexism that is keeping our minorities down. We used to be first in the world in education. The best education in the world was in the 1960s, found in America. The model there, and what has changed between the 1960s and today, is control. And this is going to be a tough concept for most educators to understand and process. So I'd like you to just kick this around a little bit and understand what control kills. Control kills creativity, curiosity, innovation, and determination. Just the foundations of our educational system, as well as what goes inside the classroom. Inside the classroom, what goes on in the textbook is not as important as the creativity of the educational environment. And educators know what I just said, and they understand that. So in the mid-1960s, we had small classrooms. We had local control. And that means the local community dictated what was in the classroom, in the curriculum, what the teachers did and said, and the teachers were involved back in the community. Local control, local community. So I went to Texas State University and immersed myself in the doctoral system there, or doctoral program there in education. And my eyes were opened. They came from a system of control. So they understand that's what you need to do. Here is the model of education today. If you equip it, you have to control it. That's exactly the opposite of what you need to do. You need to equip it and remove control from it. It's called centrally equip, decentrally execute. It is the model of military success. You know, the Pentagon doesn't control anything. The Pentagon is an equipping agency. All it does is provide the intelligence, the support, and gives command and control out to the local communities to succeed. The same model used in the 1960s in our educational system. It is also the model we have to go back to. Communism is 6 things. It is no choice in what you get, force if you don't comply, no input in how it works. You have, the people in it hate it. There's actually propaganda that say it works great and your removal of your rights. Our educational system follows much of that model, and that's why we went from first to worst while spending the most. You can't go from first to worst while spending the most unless you're incompetent, you intentionally try to destroy it, or you just don't understand the problem. Most educators, superintendents at the school board have been raised inside the educational system. It's hard to have an out-of-box event that they can look back and go, look, if we're failing all over the country, it's a systems problem. Now, since they don't see it as a systems problem, here's actually the educator's answer to why all these schools are falling. It has to be racism and discrimination. So white men, you're the problem. I've actually had people, that's the official Texas State University position on inner city failure is white men. What it means is that if you ever stand up and go, white men are the reason for our city's failure in education, you need to be fired for 3 reasons. 1, you admit you have no idea how to fix it. It's an admission. What are you going to do? Go out and murder 90 million people? No, you're not going to murder 90 million white men. What you're going to do is try and solve the problem. The second thing you admit is that you're a racist and a sexist. And you should not be in the office. The third thing that you admit is that you quit. So what's the solution then? You know, when you go to educators and you talk with them, educators, which I mean by this, I mean by teachers up to principals, they know that they are not the ones at fault. In fact, they're so frustrated that teachers quit at 50%. 50% of all new teachers quit in 5 years, frustrated with the system. And the system, the system that they walk into is a lot of bureaucracy, and then they finally reach the classroom. They're faced with a classroom size of 30 to 35. They have control on top of them, telling them not only what to do, but how to teach. Who we need to wrestle to the ground are our superintendents and our school board, PhDs. This is a tough task for us Americans to go to our PhDs and grab them, and the first thing we got to do is strangle them to the ground and go, the system we currently have is a failure. You can't solve any problems if we don't first admit there is a problem. And when we have 73% of people dropping out of Detroit, 70% from Indianapolis and Baltimore, here in Texas 54%, that's failure. That's educational failure. 740 superintendent PhDs, all making 6 figures. These 6-figure PhDs, the highest is in Dallas, making $540,000. Our here in Austin, we're actually on the lower end of the pay scale, around $270,000. But if you take those 740 PhDs and you put them in a room, that's $13 million a year that we spend on them implementing control. If you look at their job description enforces them and adds them to add control. And I'm going to talk a little bit more of what we need to do. But step 1 is we've got to admit that it's a failure. Our educational system, our inner city school system nationwide is a failure. Second thing we have to do is admit the cause. We can't step back and go, well, it's racism and sexism and colonialism and postmodernism and post-structuralism, and we need to deconstruct 3 ways of feminism. Those are great concepts to talk about so that we understand that philosophy, but it doesn't solve the nuts and bolts problem of control. Now, here's the root cause. Erwin Rommel said, tell people what to do. Don't tell them how to do it, and let them surprise you with your ingenuity. That goes back to my earlier statement. You have to equip and remove control. Now, people go, you can't prove to me that control kills. Yes, I can. And social psychology and research says control does kill creativity, curiosity, innovation, and determination. And it kills it because any time that you come up with a new idea, a new innovative idea, you're going to run into 6 people. The first person's going to say, that can't be done. The second person's going to say, that's not how we do it. The third person's going to say, I'm actually going to stop you from trying. The fourth person's going to say, what a great idea, but you're not the person to do it. The fifth person will say, what a great idea, let me help you, and doesn't follow through, and you're going to meet the rare 6th person that says, Reid, what a great idea. I love what you're talking about. Let's implement that. If you want to talk about looking at bureaucracy that has continued to add on top of the teacher, go read a book called Up the Down Staircase, printed in the 60s, where when we had the #1 educational system in the world, there was complaints then about the bureaucracy stopping them from being successful teachers. That has only gotten worse. That narrative has gotten worse, and that is what is destroying our kids. As our millennials actually learn completely differently than we used to learn. The connection with computer animation and games and 3D immersion, of which, you know, that's part of my industry base, is it's actually changing how our young millennials think and process information. It's helping young women become more successful in three-dimensional geometry and trigonometry and shapes. But the part of that research is that you present it to PhDs and go, look, the millennial generation doesn't learn by lecture and by homework and by presentation in a 35 classroom. They learn by relationships. And they learn by connect me to everything and let me be horizontal. Let me have my iPad open in class and dial it up and talk to my friends. Let me touch it and smell it. If we are not going to teach in the mode at which they learn, we are going to fail an entire another generation of children. Here's some hard changes that you can address to your PhDs. Number one is to change the mission statement of the high school. The mission statement of the high school and any education should be prepare, assist that parent in preparing that child for that child's future. Whether it be banging a drum, going in the military, being a psychologist, working in industry, whatever that is, the educational system should help the parent prepare for that. Number two is to change how we allocate money and resources. Right now we allocate money according to the number of students in the number of seats for the number of days. This encourages large classrooms and encourages large bureaucracies and encourages these large monolithic structures that we test and homework to death, and we're killing our kids. So we need to allocate resources, and this is going to be tough. The superintendent and the principal need to be given power to allocate resources to set the educational environment, not butts in the seat. And what that means is class size 10 to 12, 15 max. And that is especially with our millennial generation. They have to have this horizontal relationship and connectivity, and you can't have it with 35 or you're just going to turn into some sort of a social mob. The next thing we need to do is we need to restructure what happens to the teachers when they come into the educational environment. We need to provide for solid mentoring, encouragement, care, and feeding. What we do with teachers is we throw them in the classroom and we go, sink or swim. I'm going to pound you for the things that you don't do right, and then once in a while I might say good job. But the principal, one principal, cannot care and feed for 100 teachers. It can't be done. So what we need to do is need to resource mentoring so that the principal mentors the chairs, that mentors then your teachers, and allow the superintendencies, allow our six-figure PhDs to actually then turn around and mentor the principal in how to be a community leader. This is huge change for principals. You're not only leading your teachers in your school, you need to be a leader in your community and allow community involvement such that the community assists in the education and the educators assist back in the community. That's the way it used to be in the 60s, and that's where we need to go back to. The next thing we need to do on top of that is never teach math and science in a secondary language. You know, we have French speakers up in our north, we have Spanish speakers in our south, and those kids amaze me. They can sit in a classroom and learn physics and chemistry and advanced concepts in a secondary language. This is where our community needs to get involved. So the last thing we need to do, on top of those educational reforms that I just, and this is going to be tough for educators to hear, you have to allow parents to leave failing schools. Now I already talked earlier about what communism is, and communism is force. In Texas, it's 6 years. A school can fail for 6 straight solid years before the parents have the power and privilege to leave that school. Whenever you grab someone and you force them, I'm going to tell you what you're going to get, and I'm going to force you to comply. That's called communism. That individual child's rights, that child has a right to a successful education. If this school is going to fail for whatever reason it is, normally it's because we have controlled it to the point that teachers don't care anymore and they're upset with the system. So when that school fails to that point, parents need to be able to pull their kids out of that school and go to another school. Our children's future depends on it. If we're going to turn our country around, if we're going to get to the point where we have a productive society, every PhD that is in the educational side will tell you that an educational background is extremely important for a productive society. If we're failing at our fundamental task of educating our children, then we are going to fail in the fundamental task of being a society that produces and is honorable and takes care of each other. This is why this is my number one issue, because we don't admit it, we don't wrestle it to the ground and try and figure out what's causing it. I ask you to reconsider this. What you can do right now on the local level is engage your local principal, Ask them why they can't control. And they'll tell you, and they'll explain it to you. And then you're going to have to start engaging your local legislators and saying, let's start thinking about, let's first admit the problem, start thinking about those 5 changes that were just proposed, and let's kick it around. And we can take our country back. We can give local control. I ask you to consider it, and I look forward to continuing to represent some of these ideas in the future. Thank you.